Hey everybody, today we're going to be talking about part 2 of Do I Need an Emergency Fund? If you haven't already done so, go ahead and watch the last video titled Do I Need an Emergency Fund? Part 1. Today is part 2, so part 1 real quick is basically talking about, the purpose of part 1 was to help you determine whether or not you need an emergency fund. So part 2 is being created under the assumption that, yes, I do need an emergency fund. Now I need to know how much do I put in an emergency fund. So we're going to talk about that now. So an emergency fund, just to make sure everybody's clear, an emergency fund is basically just a place where you can put your money for emergencies. And so the question becomes, all right, so I have a place to put the money. How much do I need to build up in that emergency fund now? So I'm going to go over that right now, and then we'll get into where to put the money, what types of accounts to have the money in. But first off, let's talk about how much to have. So if you watched the last video, part 1, you probably noticed that there are two questions to ask yourself. One had to do with deductibles, and the other one had to do with a job or a career change. So starting with the deductibles, okay? If you have auto insurance, most of us do have auto insurance, homeowners insurance or renters insurance, health insurance. Those are pretty, maybe even life insurance. Those are pretty common, but life insurance doesn't really apply in this case. So really auto, home, or renters, and like health insurance. Those are like the 3 main types of insurance that people have and that potentially they could file a claim on. The reason I bring those up is because there's the likelihood that you might have to file a claim for your auto, your home, renters, or health insurance. And if you do, you're going to be responsible for paying your deductible before the insurance comes in to rescue you and pays for part of your losses. So because of that, it's important to know how much your deductibles are. And so the first thing, when we ask ourselves, how much should I have saved up? Well, you want to have enough money saved up to cover your deductibles. So let's just say you get really lucky this year and you have to file an auto claim and you have to file a homeowner's claim too. So let's say you have a health insurance that you utilize as well. So let's say you strike the jackpot and you have to use all 3 types of insurance this year. So let's say your auto insurance, you have a $500 deductible. Let's say homeowners insurance or renters insurance is a $500 deductible as well. That's $1,000 so far in deductibles. And let's say your health insurance has a $1,000 deductible. That's $2,000 total, right? So in case you have to use those 3 types of insurance this year, you're going to be responsible for paying potentially $2,000 out of your own pocket before your insurance kicks in. So that's why I gave an example here of $2,000. It's $2,000 in deductibles. That's how I came up with that. Now your situation could be different, but this is just an example. This is just a benchmark to help you gauge how much you might need to save up depending on what your deductibles are. Okay? Now, the other question that we talked about in the first video was if you go through a career change, if you're changing careers and it's going to take a few weeks, could take a few months for you to start generating some income again, you need some money saved up to help you pay for your normal living expenses, day to day, week to week, month to month until you start your new career. And so generally, if you do any research, you read any books, you watch any videos, generally you might hear people say, well, it's good to have 3 to 6 months of expenses saved up in an emergency fund in case that happens. You might hear some people say, 6 to 12 months. So just to keep things middle of the road here, I went with 6 months. So in addition to having $2,000 saved up in this example for deductibles, you also want to add to that 6 months of expenses. So I just create an example. Let's say, this person that we're talking about has expenses totaling up to $2,500 a month that they pay for them and maybe their family too. $2,500 worth of expenses, multiply that by 6 months that you want to have as a cushion, and that equals $15,000. So, if this person was creating an emergency fund, they would want to have at least $2,000 to cover deductibles and another $15,000 to cover their 6 month worth of expenses. So grand total of $17,000. So that's just, again, this is just an example to give you an idea, give you a gauge, to give you a baseline, supposedly, I guess you can say, to help you determine how much you want to have in your emergency fund. It can be less than 6 months. It doesn't have to be exactly 6 months, but I use 6 months because that's generally like the average amount of time that a lot of experts encourage you to have. So I use 6 months. So yeah, that's pretty straightforward, right? You want to have enough money to cover your deductibles and 6 months of worth of expenses. If you want to have more, put more in your emergency fund, you can do that. If you don't want to have as much, you might be taking a chance, but it's up to you. That's the most important thing, is you're being responsible in establishing an emergency fund, and it's always up to you. It's your decision as far as what you want to do, how much you want to have in your emergency fund. So let's say you make that determination. Let's say you decide, all right, this is how much money I need in an emergency fund. Where do I put that money? Do I tuck it under the mattress? Do I put it in my safe? Do I, put it in a bank account? What do I do? So now I want to cover, where do I put the money in? What do I do with the money? Okay. So as you can see, here's a question. Where do I put it? And what do I do with the emergency fund money? So I wrote down 2 things, credit union or online bank. So let's start with that. So credit unions will more than likely have better interest rates. They'll offer better interest rates than banks would. But an online bank is an exception. An online bank like Ally Bank, for example, they're an online bank, meaning you can't just drive up to a building and go inside and talk to somebody and make deposits, make withdrawals, and transact business. They're an online bank, which means they're remote. They utilize their technology to service their customers. They don't have brick and mortar. They don't have actual buildings to buy, to rent out, to pay taxes on. They don't invest money in physical buildings for people to come visit them and do business. And for that reason, they're able to offer higher rates. So if you had to pick one place, just a very basic place to put your emergency fund, I would say you probably want to look at a credit union or an online bank for those reasons. Again, a credit union probably pays more than most banks do, especially banks that have brick and mortar buildings, who are not online banks. And then online banks could be an alternative, like Ally Bank, for example. I'll leave a description or some information in the description below. I like Ally Bank a lot, actually. They offer, currently in this environment, I think they're offering 0.5% interest compared to like 0.05 interest for a lot of other institutions. So they offer a higher interest rate than you can get elsewhere, all because they're an online bank. So if you had to pick one place, I would say you probably want to look at these 2 options here, credit union or an online bank. Now, let's talk about inflation. Okay, I might create a new video about inflation next, but inflation is pretty straightforward. It's most people think of inflation as a general rise in prices. So prices of goods and services. And the government, the United States government, they have what's called the Bureau of Labor Statistics that keeps track of inflation on a monthly basis and on an annual basis, on a quarterly basis, just on a regular basis, pretty much. And they found that in 2021, last year, inflation was about 6 to 7% in that range. Normally, over the past 100 years, on an average, inflation is more around 3% every year. Sometimes it's lower, sometimes it's higher, but on average, it's usually about 3%. And last year it was double that, 6 to 7%, almost more than double that. So it was pretty high. You probably felt that when you go to the grocery store, when you buy certain things, certain common things like groceries, gas, clothing, insurance, just different things. And so you feel the effects of it. Your money's not going to work as much as it did before the inflation occurred. And so inflation is very real. It's hitting our pocketbooks, hits everybody's pocketbook, poor and rich, no matter where you fall on that spectrum. And so everybody's affected and everybody's going to have to deal with it. So because it's a reality that we have to live with, I bring up the second option here because the reality is this. If inflation is growing at a 6% rate, which it did last year, and so far this year in 2022, it's around the same thing, 6%, 7%. If inflation's growing at 6%, meaning prices of goods and services are increasing by 6%, and you're putting money in a savings account that's only earning 0.5% interest, who's ahead of the game? Is inflation ahead or are you ahead? Inflation's ahead because it's growing at a greater rate. It's kind of like running a mile. If you're running an 8-minute mile and somebody else is running a 6-minute mile, they're going to lap you eventually. They're going to pass you up. And that's what's happening with inflation. Inflation is going to pass you up, and you think, oh, I'm doing a great job of saving, but inflation's increasing more than the amount of money that you're getting in return at the bank. And so unfortunately what that means is your money's not going as far as it could go. And so I bring that up to say that an alternative to putting money in just a credit union or an online bank could be investing in a mutual fund. Investing in a mutual fund usually is going to earn you more than you would get in a credit union or an online bank. So if you're thinking about, maybe matching inflation, if you want to take a little bit more risk and potentially reap a greater reward, you might want to consider investing some of your emergency fund in a mutual fund. So those are just a couple of things to consider. I might talk about inflation in the next video, just in case you don't know exactly how it works. But at the very least, you know that it exists and that it affects how you save money. And as a result, when you ask yourself the question, where do I put my emergency fund? What do I do with the money? At the very least, now you know what you can do. I would suggest considering a credit union or an online bank and maybe even a mutual fund to help you earn more than you would with this first option. So as always, I thank you for watching. Hopefully this taught you something new. Hopefully it positively impacts your life. And if it does, I encourage you to share the video with somebody that you know that you think could benefit from it. As always, like and comment. If you have something to share, feel free to leave a comment. And as always, thank you for watching. So that's all that I have for you. I look forward to seeing you in the next video. Subscribe if you like to be notified when the next video will come out. I'm not sure what it's going to be about. There's a few things that I'm considering, but if you want to see the next video when it comes out, go ahead and hit that subscribe button. So great seeing you again. I look forward to seeing you in the next video, and that's it for now. So take care. I'll see you later. Bye-bye.